Welcome to Bonn Park. I'm Sara Geidlinger.
And I'm Marshall Ward.
And today we have Carolyn Parks and Della vanDokkumburg from Blue Sky Art Studio in the village of St. Jacobs.
These are two very different artists. Carolyn does these beautiful, rich, and bright wool paintings, while Della does these whimsical and striking illustrations of buildings using watercolor and ink. And I think they're a great pair, and we're doing back-to-back interviews with them.
We really geek out on the details here, like what it's like for Carolyn to work with wool and what that feels like and how she creates. And also with Della, how she came up with the way she draws the perspective of these buildings, all buildings that you would recognize.
Yeah, let's kick it off first with Carolyn, and then we'll speak to Della.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Do you enjoy Bonn Park podcast?
If so, we would really appreciate it if you
Leave a review.
like, rate, subscribe, but most importantly,
Share directly from the platforms.
with your family and friends. That's the best way to get the word out to everybody, and more people will get to see our show that way. So click those like buttons and share our show. Thank you.
Thanks.
On with the show. This is it. Bonn Park is supported by Waterloo Brewing. Since they first opened their doors in 1984, Waterloo Brewing has invited thirsty beer lovers to pour the boar. A symbol of strength and courage, the boar is a fitting symbol for Waterloo Brewing. The company is not only Ontario's first craft brewer, in operation decades before the current microbrew trend, but it is also the largest. To pour the boar is to taste an Ontario brewing tradition that is always evolving. The core recipes on which they built their success remain the same, using only fresh and simple ingredients. Waterloo Brewing's balanced quality beers like their traditional IPA, dark amber, and craft lager were created to be enjoyed year-round. Perfect for sweltering summers, their crisp and refreshing fruit radlers have been wildly popular. These drinks blend craft lager with real fruit juice to create sweet and punchy flavors like watermelon, tart cherry, raspberry pineapple, and Waterloo Brewing's award-winning grapefruit. Waterloo Brewing's beer store is located at 400 Binghamton Centre Drive in Kitchener, or visit them online for free local board-to-door home delivery at waterloobrewing.com. Whether you've been pouring the boar since 1984, or you've never poured the boar before, Waterloo Brewing has your perfect pour in store. We are supported by Green Beaver. Since 2002, Green Beaver has provided sustainable products for everyday life, like all-natural shampoos, toothpastes, antiperspirants, soaps, and more. Just in time for summer, Green Beaver has mineral sunscreens that are free of harmful chemicals and leave no sticky residue. They've also got organic beeswax lip balms made with extracts from Canadian cranberries and raspberries. And for the little ones, they've got soothing soaps and lotions made for delicate baby skin. The busy beavers behind Green Beaver have backgrounds in biochemistry and microbiology. They know the science behind their products, and they know what feels good. Take care of yourself and your family with the help of Green Beaver. Find Green Beaver products at Goodness Me in Waterloo. Visit greenbeaver.com and follow them on social media. I will tell you, we use the Green Beaver shampoo and conditioner around this house, and it makes a huge difference.
Okay, I think we're going to get rolling then.
Yeah, let's get going. So Carolyn Parks, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to talk to you. So you're, in my mind, living the dream job. You have an art studio in the village of St. Jacobs.
Yes.
And you are creating full time. Tell us about that.
Well, I'm going to first interject and say, I wouldn't say full time is the proper depiction of what I'm doing right now. I have two kids. One is 14 and one's 11. And I would say I'm much more a stay-at-home mom right now, doing a lot of parenting, a lot of dishwashing, a lot of dealing with online school stuff and issues and teen challenges. So, but yes, the whole plan was that I would get to set my own hours and work at the studio whenever I want. And it is just a beautiful, beautiful thing that it's happening. And you're right. It's a dream. It's totally a dream.
So you have Blue Sky Studio with fellow artist Della.
Yeah. The neat thing that happened there was that I found Della on Instagram. I saw her work several times, and I just thought, I am just so delighted by her style. It's so whimsical, so vibrant. And I reached out to her actually just to say, I love what you do. And at that point, this space hadn't even come up at this point. And we are part of the Kissing Bridge Studio Tour, Kissing Bridge Trail Studio Tour. And that happens in October. And when I joined that group, that tour, I said to them, hey, we should invite Della to come into the tour. And then at that point, a month later, the space came up and I decided to take it. And then I approached Della to see if she wanted to join me. So we hadn't known each other very long. We'd only known each other like 2 months when this all happened. So it was like wonderful. It was like kismet.
I kind of love that. We've met a lot of interesting people through the podcast. And sometimes it is just me reaching out on Instagram or Marshall cold emailing somebody and saying, I see you have an art show. What is it that's coming up? What have you been up to? Come talk to us about it.
Yes.
I love that about our community because most people are very receptive to that kind of invitation. They want to talk about what it is that they're creating and they want to connect with other creators. And I think that's fantastic because what you and Della create they're very different types of art. So a big part of what you do includes wool felting, wet wool painting. How did you get into that?
Always been a creative person, but I never found a medium that I really wanted to pursue. Nothing seemed to stick with me. I would dump it right away. It would frustrate me, or I just didn't feel like it was speaking to me. I did try sculpture because, of course, my husband is a sculptor. And so I thought, well, I'll play with some clay a little bit. And then that didn't do anything for me. And so I was thinking I probably won't, find my thing. And then I bought this little kit for my daughter. And it was a needle felting kit. And I had seen needle felting before. And I knew at the time that it would really be just for me, of course. And so when she got that kit, I, puttered away with the needle felting, which is one form of felting wool. And I had a blast and I thought, wow, I could see myself doing this. So I started doing all these little things, 3-dimensional things. And then I met somebody who got me into the wet felting, which is another way of felting wool. You don't use a needle, you use water and soap, and you create a design with the wool and then you wet it down, add soap. You roll it up and then you agitate it. You roll so that the soap and the water and the agitation felts the wool. So when that happened and I did that, I was so blown away by it. I just absolutely realized that was where I wanted to go. So with that was born my thing, and I've never gotten tired of it. I just am so excited by wool, which sounds so nerdy, I know, but I absolutely love it.
And you must have been drawn to the colors. What I mean is the wool I see in your work, there's these beautiful, rich, warm reds and warm blues and stuff. You realize you can do these very warm, darker pieces with wool if you want to.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head there, because going back to what I said earlier about clay, I realized that, well, part of the reason why I don't like clay is I don't like my hands to get that messy. And the color, it's just bland, grayish. I don't like that. And when I was around the wool, it's so gorgeous. You get every shade under the sun and the feel of it. I mean, it's so smooth and everybody is sort of attracted to different media for different reasons. And that's why it spoke to me, was the level of vibrance of the hues and the feel of the wool. So you nailed it there with the colors.
And don't you think your first-time students are taking quite a leap? Like, I imagine they think, I'm not sure if I'm going to like working with this medium, if they haven't tried it before. It's kind of like printmaking. When people go into printmaking, they must think, I don't know if this is going to work for me or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. Yeah, I think some of them come because you'll see that some of them are very creative in many ways. They'll do multiple things artistically, and they just absolutely want to consume anything that is artistic. So those people are going to go out and try anything. They'll try the printmaking, like you said. They'll try the wool painting. But ironically, there are those people who have actually not tried very many things at all, and yet they come, and when we do introductions in the class, they'll say things like, I don't have a creative bone in my body. You know, these people, every class, I always have one or two people that thinks they're not creative at all. And yet here they came to a class that's wet felting, which is kind of a, like you said, a little bit of a mental leap to imagine yourself creating a picture when you don't even understand the process at all. So I've been actually really excited to see that. I think it's because it's so unique and so different. They're not seeing that kind of a thing out there. So they're just maybe a little adventurous to try something new, which I think is amazing.
And is it a forgiving medium?
Oh, yeah, very forgiving, which is why I stuck with it. Because the first stage of design is, I lay down wool fibers. It's called wool roving. So it's wool fibers that run in one direction parallel to the other. They haven't been all tangled up. And they're not spun like yarn. It's just loose individual wool fibers. And they've been combed and dyed. And so basically I call it wool painting because it is like working with paint. You lay down the wool and it's like a brush stroke. And so then I do the design that way. And there is a process to this. You have to build it up from the bottom up, and it has to end up quite thick. And the uppermost layers is where a lot of your design starts to happen. And it's just a long process, but it comes together so magnificently. The alchemy is just amazing as you design. And so I'm sorry, I'm losing the thread as to what you actually were asking me, because I started thinking about wool and design. Take me back, Marshall, take me back.
Yeah, so I guess I'm talking about also happy accidents. When I think about something like watercolor, like some people they can master watercolor and work with ink and stuff like that. And then other times people are just, I can't use watercolor. I don't feel like I have any control over this medium. Do most people feel like they have some sense of control when they're working with wool?
Right. Thank you. I lost that thread, that wool fiber. I lost that wool fiber halfway through as I was talking about the process. Yes, you can pull off fibers. You say to yourself in the design process before you've even wet felted, you can take away and you can add. There's a whole lot of forgiveness. Then, of course, after the wet felting, things are a little more, set, as it were, because it's been felted. But what I usually do is I stop a little bit short, a little bit shy of fully really hard felted. And if I don't like something, I can still, if I really don't like something, I can some of it I can tear off and maybe needle felt in after. So I do have access to my needle afterwards, and I can really embellish a piece a lot. And you could do stitching and embroidery. There's a lot of ways to really make things pop. So yes, the wet felting afterwards, it's harder. As for to go back, but at the same time, like you say, once in a while, there might be a happy accident, like where you look at everything and see how it's shifted and moved, and you think, wow, I really like that effect. But then there's also sort of the nightmares once in a while where I'll wet felt something and I'll look at it after and say, that was so much more beautiful before I put the water and soap on it. So I have to then sometimes pivot or pitch, as I like to say. Like sometimes it's like, well, am I going to be able to make something out of this or not? And then sometimes I'll wrestle with it for a while, and I can bring it to a lovely place, but it may be quite far from what I had initially pictured. So absolutely, things change as you go.
And what if you can't? Are you able to rip it apart and resalvage some pieces? Or do you seem to always get to somewhere where you're like, I'm happy that this was something that was created and I'm moving on to the next piece, or I'm happy with this, it's beautiful, and now I can display it?
I think most times I'm very stubborn. So I think sometimes when I'm not happy with something, I think a person needs to play to their strengths. And at this early stage of my art career, I would say I'm one of my strengths is my needle felting. So I can usually do some good stuff with that needle after it's dried. I think as time goes on, I will become more and more expert with the design process that goes before the wet felting. I'll learn about how the wool interacts with each, all the fibers interact and how the colors interact. And I think you just learn the medium more. And I think that will become more fine tuned. I have had one piece where I really thought it was going to be nice. It was like a moonlight at the cottage and all this. And honestly, it was like a complete wreck when I was done. I cut it up and I just couldn't salvage it. I tried, and eventually I really just had to give in. And I said, this is just not happening. But the rest I've kind of made happen, I think.
And did you say, so as you build it up, are you working from dark to light? Is that how these are
No, not really. It's more like, if you think about a painter working with, say, acrylic or whatever, oil paints, basically what's happening there is that they start with the very back of their, the canvas. And the first thing they do is they think about the very background of their painting, right? Or they often seem to build up from the bottom up, and then the top most is like the finest details on the top. So it's more about building from the background of the image up. So say I'm doing a field scene where there's a beautiful blue sky and clouds, and in the foreground there's grass and maybe a stream running through. Then I look to the very background of the picture and I say, okay, well, I want to do blue sky. So I'll probably start with blues. It's going to be really rough though, laying down the wool. I'm at the bottommost levels, I'm creating thickness. I'm laying down the wool because I do have to end up with a certain thickness of a piece. So I basically am using the colors, the tones that I want to form the basis of the picture. And then as I go up through the layers, you start getting into more subtleties, which is, well, what colors do I want to emerge in this blue sky? Do I want other colors mixing in? Do I want to blend in some other colors? Do I want streaks? Do I want clouds? Do I want depth? Do I want it to be moody? Do I want it to be bright? So it's more color based than it is, based on the picture you're going from or the image that you want to go with.
And are there certain go-to colors that you go to? I think about when it comes to acrylic painting, a lot of painters will always start with an underpainting that maybe is like a cadmium yellow medium. And that's how every painting starts. And that kind of shines through in some way, almost like the piece is illuminated from within, and then they'll finish it off with a yellow glaze, the same kind of cadmium yellow medium. When you work on your pieces, do you have certain colors that you use over and over again, especially when it comes to maybe sky and water?
Well, I think this is where we would say I'm a work in process, because again, learning about the wool, I'm not sure wool behaves the same way as paint, because when you cover wool over wool, in general, you're kind of covering the color underneath. So, however, that said, as time goes on, what I might start playing with is take a shocking, take a really dark charcoal or a black, and then try to put some lighter blues on top and see if I'm going to be able to get some really great depth that way. So I generally speaking, when I'm doing sky, I'm generally starting off with sort of this average blue that I tend to go to because I got lots of it. And then if I know I'm looking for a very moody sky, then I'm going to quickly start moving towards, the darker grays and those kinds of tones, and maybe put in a little bit of a darker lavender to add in and add others and play with them and blend. I also blend wools with using garters. So then that's how you're going to get some really subtle tones. And I'm not sure if it behaves the same way as paint exactly. I'm not a painter, so I'm really not an expert about how that works.
There's something about working with your hands that I love. And it's not something that's a big part of what I do every day in my life, but it makes me so happy. If that's preparing food from the farmer's market, chopping everything up and working with my hands for a few hours, or being in the garden or creating a piece of art. I've made a little bit of art in my life. When I was looking it up, wool felting dates back to thousands of years to Central Asia and Europe. It's a really old medium. So when you're working with this wool, I'm wondering, are you getting that satisfaction of building with your hands, making with your hands? Are you getting that grounded, yummy feeling that feels so good when you create?
Grounded and yummy. Well, you know what? It depends, Sarah, how it's going. I will say Yes, for sure. But I mean, to joke about it a little bit, like like I told you before, sometimes I'm wrestling with the piece. And if that's the case, I seem to go through a lot of emotions, part of which is extreme anger and profanity. There are those times where I'm just not feeling yummy and happy at all. But to be honest with you, working with the wool, yes, it brings me, there is something about that tactile experience, pulling the wool apart. And sometimes it's just the smallest little titch of wool. I'll laugh. I'll go over to my shelves of wool and I'll pull out this little piece of gold and I'll laugh and I'll walk over to my piece and I'll just put the tiny little bit of wool on. And there is something very beautiful about that, how you put a little dash of this, little dash of that, like cooking, right? And like you said, getting the hands in there, I do think it really is. There's something about that for people, I think, whether you work with your hands or not in your job. I just have learned that, yeah, when you're creating with your hands, I just think it probably would bring something to all people.
And next, we're going to be chatting with your business partner, Della. Tell us about Della.
Della is wonderful. She lives in Conestoga, and she has, she's busy with her family. Her kids are older than mine. She has 4, and they're very, very busy people. But she's been sketching for a few years. She's like, well, probably for years. She's liked sketching, but I think she's been doing more and more of it over the last few years. She took a couple courses in sketching, and she's just, as I'm telling you, she's a natural. And she would just set up anywhere, take her chair and sit down. And usually she draws structures. She's partial to houses and bridges and boats, and there's always a structure involved usually. And then applying the color, she'll take that sketch and she'll then, do her magic with her watercolors. And so she's, now she's been doing some books, and she'll tell you all about this, but she's done a few collections, as it were, for different towns. For instance, she did a book of structures that are in Conestoga, and she writes the history down. She's a wonderful writer. She writes about the history of the buildings and basically presents it like a walking tour. And now she's also done West Monroe's. She's working on a book for St. Jacobs. So all her pictures are in that book. And a portion of the proceeds also goes to charity, which is really super nice. She's very caring that way too. So it's been a really wonderful synergy between the two of us, working with bright colors, but in our own totally different ways.
Yeah, in her case, there's lots of white space, right? And
yes,
I love that. I love that. I was saying to Sarah, the kind of that bleed of the color, and then that's and then you've got the stark, lines usually of architecture that just look absolutely beautiful. You have no idea how she really puts it all together.
I asked her that question once, and she often says things like, I get lost in the lines, and because I was just so curious, how do you draw this? Where do you start? And so it's quite fascinating how people who are artists, how they take on something. You're sitting in front of this big house, for instance. I said, how do you do it so that you don't end up squished up against the edge of the page like I always did when I was 8 years old? Like when I say happy birthday and the word day would end up, wrapping around the side. I said, how does that happen? And so she explained that a little bit to me. So it's really neat for me to watch her pieces come to life.
And what did that first year look like for your studio? What a brave thing the two of you did, making a decision to open a studio and St. Jacobs, which has, different seasons, right? And what did that first year look like? And how did you picture it?
Well, we got the space in August and we started in September. So we're just approaching, I don't know, or what are we at now? 8 months, I guess. I knew all along that I would probably teach some workshops. I didn't know how well it would be received, but I figured people would be interested, hoped. And that has been great. Of course, running no workshops now. And we weren't counting on retail traffic. This was never intended to be a studio that's open, 9 to 5. And if you happen to walk in, hey, how you doing? That's not really what we wanted. We wanted a space where we could create, doors closed, but then set open hours when we want to. So for instance, I've told you about an exhibit we're planning for that will be open for certain hours. Of course, I run my workshops, or maybe we would post that we're open, for such and such a weekend to show something else along a theme. So that has been that's great for us because we weren't necessarily relying on foot traffic to come in. That's not what we were about. Now, having no workshops right now, yeah, that's a challenge for me, but I'm not concerned. I mean, I'll be able to resume, and let's hope that we all can resume within, a couple of months. I mean, obviously that's concerning, but yeah, I'm proud of us. I think we both were at a stage of our lives where we wanted to explore our creative sides and really be able to jump in a little bit and take that next step in the stage that we were at with family, et cetera.
So I have to ask the question, what was that like to open it up in the midst of the pandemic?
Obviously I worry about the pandemic for lots of people and in general, about the pandemic, of course, but it's not my livelihood. My studio is not. I am a well-kept lady right now, I think. And
why? What does your husband do?
I know I'm not sounding very liberated, am I? But I'm just going to be honest. My husband has supported us, and this was not meant to be, Carolyn, get out there, hurry up, earn the salary. If I had to, I would. So yeah. I'm very fortunate that I don't feel the pressures that a lot of people do to generate an income within a certain amount of time. So to be very honest with you, Sarah, that was not a pressure for me. I mean, there's a little bit of pressure in the sense that I want to cover my expenses, pay my rent, and that kind of thing. So honestly, I think that's really helped out a lot.
I want to take a moment to just talk about your joke about being a well-kept woman. We're speaking to an engineering grad student, Liz Hofer, back in a series we did on Technovation. And she spoke to, she's a young woman who's not yet out in the world. She's finishing her education. Right. And she was speaking to household labor and how it hasn't been addressed yet, how both parents are expected to work, no matter what that family might look like. Both parents are expected to work and still keep up with the parenting and the household labor, and that we're just supposed to assume that we can get it all done. So, you may be a well-kept woman, but I think your husband is also a well-kept man.
I do agree with you. This is very much, we have some of the traditional lines of, division of labor in our house. I mean, we are one of those houses where I'm doing the bulk of the parenting during the day. Tim gets up at 4 and he goes off to his studio and he comes home at 6:30 and he goes to bed at 9. I mean, he's got a very, very demanding career as an artist. He does. And I take care of the kids' needs during the day. I do all the housework. I do all the appointments. It's a very full-time job.
It is.
And it just happens to be those traditional lines in our house. So we have a partnership that works. Okay. And you're right. He is well taken care of as well. We both are. And I'm very fortunate to have what I have in place.
Carolyn, when you and Della picked St. Jacobs Village, was it kind of like you thought, yeah, there's a space for us here. This is a good fit? Or had you considered other places too?
I knew I wanted a place in St. Jacobs because I live here. And for me, the idea of just being able to walk out the door and be at my studio within 2 minutes was very appealing, just because I have appreciated being close to home as a person who stayed at home with her kids. That was important to me. And I did look actually for a year prior to finding this space. I was just connecting with some people in town, asking them if they would consider it or if they knew of anybody that had a space. Nothing really serious came up. There was one space I was looking at, but I think it was just too small and the model was not working. I didn't know Della at that time. So I was thinking, okay, maybe we can be a collective of a few, like 4 or 5 artists, but then it would have been too small a space. I don't think the lighting was probably as, good as it should be for an artist. So I was so keen on getting a space that I almost took it. Just that's my nature. I'm very energetic when I get an idea. I'm stubborn. I've been, in marketing and events in this community for many years. And when I have an idea, I just want to jump on it. But luckily, this was right before the pandemic started the first time round. And it just didn't work out. And I'm actually so fortunate it didn't, because eventually this space came free. And so at first I didn't even think about it. I thought, well, I did. And I thought, I don't think I can probably do that. But then I changed my mind 2 days later and I said, hey, can you put me in touch with the owners like ASAP? And then it just happened really quickly.
And the name you chose is beautiful in its simplicity. How did you come to that name? It's perfect, And when I go to your bright, beautiful website, it's the perfect name.
Yeah, it's funny. I've always been funny with names. I think you just know when you land on it. And we were tossing some things back and forth, Della and I. And we had a couple names that we came up with first, and they were okay. But then one day I was outside the studio and I was taking a picture, and it was a nice day. We were just trying to get a couple pictures of the studio just for social media or what have you. And I was pointing the camera up, and I loved what a beautiful blue sky it was. And then it just struck me. I thought, it's a blue sky. How about Blue Sky Art Studio? And it's a blue building. But even if we moved buildings, who cares? We're still Blue Sky Art Studio. And so that was it. I ran it past Della. She liked it. And then we started tossing about, how it could look, tossing that around in terms of a design. And then I passed it off to a designer I love working with. And I said, this is the concept that we'd like. And she polished it up for us. And there you have it. Bob's your uncle.
We've heard the St. Jacobs business community is incredibly welcoming and very supportive. Did you find that also to be true? And where is your studio exactly?
Our studio is at the corner of Cedar and King. We are not right facing onto King. So there's a blue building, board and batten building, I think, called It's Artistic Gift Shop. Mm-hmm. And then if you turn left onto Cedar, or I guess you'd say west, then our building, which is a continuation of the blue, that's where our studio is. So we're a little bit off the King Street, which I like. I'm glad we are, but we're right there. We're just turn the corner and we're right there. The BIA, they are absolutely lovely. They are a very active group. They have amazing ideas. They are trying to really give business owners tools and resources to get out there, also just get educated on social media if some of them are a little more hesitant or a little more nervous about it. They always are in communication saying, this is what's happening with COVID, or they're saying, here's an opportunity, guys, take us up on it, or here. They're just amazing. It's an amazing group. We're very fortunate here in town.
And those are resilient businesses down there. They had to deal before COVID with a ton of construction.
There's been a lot. I think there's been, some turnover. Some probably chose retirement early, I'm guessing, right? And then others probably couldn't make it given the industry they're in. But then at the same time, you have these new businesses flourishing in town. Like we're getting a flower shop coming into town. They're in downtown Kitchener, and they're coming to St. Jacobs. And then there's this other business that, Fog Off Clothing. His name is Tim. And he also started a candy shop, like literally within the last couple months. So, there's good things happening too. There is still this vibe and I still think there's this vibe with people. They're still happy business owners. I'm sure they're very worried in some cases, but there's still that community and sense of let's get St. Jacobs going again, which is great. I'm sure a lot of communities are like that.
And this art exhibition you have coming up.
So the name of the exhibit is Canada, Pretty as a Picture. So Della and I will just feature our works, and because she's focused on structures, houses and whatnot, there will be some really cool pictures from across Canada with Della's work. And then that will be interspersed with mine. I tend to focus more on landscape or something in nature. I may have structures in my wool paintings, but they're usually more far off. They're smaller. I don't make that structure sort of a dominant element of my pieces. So I think the mix between the natural as well as the man-made is going to make a lovely tour of Canada. And we'd like to have a playlist that's really diverse from musicians going. And we're just waiting to see what we can do here and what are our resources. And we'll make it lovely and fun. It'll be upbeat and it'll be energetic.
Bonn Park is supported by Gifted in Waterloo. Gifted has some of the quirkiest, funkiest, and coolest gifts you'll find anywhere, like tea infusers, mugs, cozy reading socks, plant pots, cushions, and throw blankets, along with amazing puzzles and games. Want the perfect gift for that hard to buy for special someone? Whether you're looking for something nerdy, literary, cute, funny, bizarre, local, nostalgic, or unexpected, Gifted has it. Among all the unique items from around the world are amazing creations by local artists, along with one-of-a-kind greeting cards. You're bound to find what you're looking for, even if you have no idea what you're looking for, at Gifted. Shop online at giftedwaterloo.com and check them out on Facebook and Instagram. Happy Natural Products is supported by Bonn Park. We've all become very familiar with hand sanitizer over the past year, and with the itchy, dry skin that it can cause. Want to stay sanitized and keep your skin moist? Happy Natural Products has a sanitizing spray that is perfect for even the most sensitive skin. To go with your clean, moisturized hands, you can get one of Happy Natural Products' stylish 3-layer organic cotton face masks for both kids and adults. Under your mask, keep your teeth pearly white with Happy Natural's antibacterial and biodegradable toothbrushes that are gentle on teeth and gums. Made for a beautiful, strong, and happy world, check out their entire line of amazing stuff, like their gua sha, facial and body massage rollers, tools owner Jennifer's family has used for generations, at happynaturalproducts.com, and find them on social media. You can still pamper yourself in a pandemic. Get happy. Della vanDokkumburg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we heard Carolyn's version of how this came to be. Let's hear your version.
Well, it was very modern sort of social media contact. A year ago, I did not know Carolyn. She didn't know me, but she found me on Instagram, commented on how she liked my sketches, invited me to join a group of artists that are from Woolwich Township. It's part of a group called the Kissing Bridge Trail Studio Tour. They were going to have an art event where we would all go to the Kissing Bridge in West Montrose and make our art there. And so that was the first time I met her. And I sketched the Kissing Bridge, and then I was invited to a meeting of the artists afterwards to see if I wanted to join the tour. So I went to the meeting and I said, I'm really honored to be here, but, we talk about a studio tour. I don't have a studio, so It's a little awkward for me to be a part of things. And Carolyn, being the ideas person that she is, just kind of tucked that into the back of her mind. She had been looking at a place in St. Jacobs, and within the week she said, "So are you interested in going in with me in a studio?" And I said, that's always been a dream of mine, but it's a dream that you can easily put away and just say, you know what, that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And now this opportunity has presented itself. It's a weird year.
We're in the middle of a pandemic. Let's open an art studio.
It's a weird year. Why would I say no to that?
Yep.
So I said, let's do it. And it was, as quick as that. She found this place. We went in there, we took a look around, and we both sort of said, this would be perfect. This would be a perfect place for us to be. And it has become each of our little havens to just get away from everything that's going on and just focus on making art.
Your work is amazing. You let the colors bleed sometimes from one building into another. Other times the structure looks not completely painted, but the lines define, everything so beautifully, and they're whimsical and so recognizable too. I don't, some of the buildings, I don't know what they're necessarily called or what they're known for, but I certainly know them to see them. When did that work start for you? When did you start drawing like that?
About a year ago.
Are you serious?
Well, I started drawing about 3 years ago. I started taking these online courses because I've illustrated before. I wrote a book 10 years ago. I illustrated it myself, wasn't really happy with the illustrations, but I loved the book, and that book still makes me happy when I read it and I look at it. But I always wanted to learn how to improve my drawing. So I started taking online courses through an online school called Sketchbook School. And it just really encouraged me to have a regular drawing habit where I would take my sketchbook around with me everywhere I went. And instead of going on my phone and whiling away the time there, I'd take out my sketchbook and I would just sketch whatever was around me. And I've got now a stack of sketchbooks that I am so proud of, just not because anything is fantastic, but because it really helped me develop. It really helped me realize that my time was better spent with a pen in hand than with my phone. And then in November of 2019, I went on a urban sketching trip in New Orleans that was organized by Brenda Murray. She used to be local here. She's now moved to Niagara, but she has a company called Studio 56. She organizes these trips where you go with an artist, you travel, and you sketch in the setting that you find yourself in. And so I decided I would like to try urban sketching. So I went to New Orleans with a group of, there's probably about 15 of us, and we were led by an artist based in the UK. His name is Ian Fennelly. And he taught us his way of sketching, how he uses color and lines and shading. And I spent a week doing that. And when this pandemic started, one of the people in our group, we connected, the group connected on Facebook. And one of the members of the group said, let's pick 30 days where we sketch something in our community. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to give that a try. And then she said, let's share our art with the world, post it on social media. So I did. I live in Conestoga, and I just started going around the village of Conestoga and started sketching the world around me in Conestoga and all of its quirky, unique, old buildings. And I just fell in love with the village by sketching it and really seeing places for the first time. I've lived here for 15 years, but when you are with a pen in hand and you look, you start to see things and appreciate what is around you, what has always been around you, but you really notice it.
And were your first drawings, were they all wonky? Like all that wonderful wonkiness?
Absolutely.
They were? Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about
I can't draw a straight line, full disclosure.
Okay.
I can't draw a straight line.
It looks like, well, no one can. It's not easy. It looks like a very deliberate choice to have that exaggerated perspective on your structures. But that is that just a natural flow of Della?
Yeah, it's becoming more intentional. It's kind of interesting how I look at, I've done hundreds of sketches over the past year, and it's interesting to see how my style has evolved in the past year. Mm-hmm. It's kind of become my pandemic project where I get to see, okay, I would probably do that differently now. But yeah, it's kind of wonky and whimsical, and that's how I know how to draw.
That's one of the most beautiful things when an artist has a style that it's not deliberate, right? Like it comes from just the way that you end up interpreting, right? We wouldn't have the work of Picasso or any of the Impressionists or anything like that if everyone saw everything the same way and translated that the same to paper.
Yeah, it's true. But it is interesting to see even how Picasso developed throughout his career and how different things were. You could still identify it as him, but it's different. It changes. It evolves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Often when you look at a body of work of an artist over many years, the early work is much tighter and something kind of loosens up along the way.
Yeah.
It might be a confidence thing. I'm not sure.
I think so. I think, putting the one thing that I learned very early on is to not use a pencil. I just use ink right away. And
you just go for it.
You commit to the line, and whatever happens. Take your time with it, but let it flow. Because otherwise, if you're using a pencil, 50% of the time you're using an eraser. Mm-hmm. So I just use ink right away and let it be. And let it be loose, right?
The color is ink as well, all that color?
The color is watercolor.
Yeah.
It's watercolor.
And it looks like the paper has a really good bite on it too, right?
Yeah, I'm playing around with that. So right now, a lot of the stuff I'm using is on cold press, which tends to have a lot more toothiness to it, but it shreds up my pens like crazy. So I've started to move towards hot press paper, but like all things right now, I'm having a hard time getting access to supplies. So I'm using whatever I have around me.
You start drawing on the walls next.
Well, that's possible.
It's possible.
So what are you looking at first when you're looking at architecture? Is it sometimes the brickwork that draws you in first? Or is it all the contour lines of the building first?
It's the overall shape, I find. And I tell you, there is a wealth of interesting buildings in Woolwich Township.
I don't know a lot about that area that you're in. So tell us a bit more about that.
Well, so I live in Conestoga, and because we were all encouraged to stay close to home a year ago, I've stuck to areas close by. So I've been sketching Conestoga, West Montrose, St. Jacobs, a little bit in Elmira. And when I sketch, what's also important to me is to tell the story that goes along with it. Pictures tell stories. Mm-hmm. And right now, I think stories are so important because they bind us together. They draw us close together. And we have this wonderful social media where we can put our stuff out there and people can respond to it. And there are so many local people who have found my sketches and have said, they've taken the time to comment and say things like, my grandmother lived in that house, or I grew up just down the road from there. I used to play at my friends who used to live there. And these stories come out and they keep growing. So I tend to focus on buildings that have been built probably in the 1800s, early 1900s, because there's so much character to those buildings. And I'm able to find, to varying degrees, a little bit of information about these houses, who built them, what they were used for. And I just think it's so interesting to learn and to tell these stories because we all have homes that we live in where there's stories of family, stories of deep meaning to us. And these sketches are able to sort of draw out those stories or retell those stories.
What I love on your Instagram is that you have sometimes the name of the building or an address, which you don't, like Marshall was saying earlier, you don't even need necessarily because it's so recognizable. So when you're talking about the storytelling through your illustration and through your drawing, the artifact salvage and design one I saw that on your Instagram. I knew what it was before I had even scrolled up all the way. It is so recognizable and it has that warmth.
And that's sort of mission accomplished from my perspective, because when I draw, I kind of go, are people really going to be able to tell what this is? Mm-hmm. But if it's recognizable through all the wonkiness and all the weird color combinations that are happening, and it means something to somebody, then it's mission accomplished on my part. That's how I feel about it.
You know what you got me thinking about is how I think a house can also lose its story. So a house that I grew up in on Talbot Street in Kitchener had a dark past and bad things happened in that house before my family bought it. And everybody in the neighborhood knew it. And also next door had a similar situation. But as the years march on and people leave and kids grow up and move away, those stories stop being told in the neighborhood. So if I walked down Talbot Street now, I wouldn't recognize anybody from my neighborhood back in the 70s.
And no one would know that story.
Yeah, and nobody would know that story. And I don't think so. Anyways, you really got me thinking about something now, Della, that I guess houses can also, and neighborhoods can lose their stories with the passage of time.
That's true. And I think there are some stories that are maybe best left unspoken. It was something I wrestled with when I was, so I've been compiling my sketches into books. So I have a book of sketches for Conestoga and a book of sketches from West Montrose. And There's one house in West Montrose that has a very dark chapter. And I chose not to include that story because there are people living in that house right now. And my books are set up so that you can go on a tour. You can take your bike on a tour through West Montrose. And I don't want...
You don't want a true crime series on your hands here.
I really don't. I want this to be a celebration of history. I want this to be a celebration of architecture. I want it to be a joyful thing. And the last thing I want to do is have people stand in front of somebody's home and think about that dark chapter that happened there. I'd rather let it just be a celebration of a beautiful old home that's stood for many years and is part of a lovely village. We all have choices that we make in editing, right? I edit in my sketches. I don't include everything in there. And so we have to edit this, well, hydro poles I actually have grown to love. And I will sometimes, and hydro wires, I think they create some really great lines. Yes. But I will move them over.
Della, also, as much as I love the lines and the color in your work, I equally love the white space.
That was one of the things that I was taught at the workshop in New Orleans, how important white space is in a sketch. So I took the cue from my instructor. He doesn't paint skies. We all know the sky is blue. We don't have to add blue to the sky necessarily. We know it's blue. And so when you create white, it just focuses your attention more on the structure and the composition.
I even use a lot of negative space as a photographer. That's one of the most beautiful things. Like, if you're catching, I love photographing children. That's one of my most favorite things to do. So if I'm catching just some baby toes, or even just like a quarter of a child's face and the rest is white space, to me, that's a winner photo. I mean, that's not going to be the one that mom and dad give to grandma and grandpa, but that's what I appreciate when it comes back to me.
I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally with you. I used to do a lot more photography before. But when I started sketching, I kind of stopped photographing. But I think what photography has taught me is about composition and how that can translate from how I would look through the lens and see things and how that might translate into how I might structure something on paper.
So are you photographing your houses or are you out there with your sketchbook?
Right now I am photographing houses. I'm a little careful about being out and about where people might be walking. We're supposed to not really be doing that. Our climate isn't always conducive to sitting outside for hours drawing.
No.
So right now, the bulk of it is working from photographs. And if the weather is nice and things start to loosen up a little bit, then I might be out there sketching.
It's interesting to think that when you're drawing a house, for example, like you're taking quite a bit of time to consider something like an eaves trough, and the angularity of it and how that sits up against maybe a vertical post or whatnot. Have you, do you find that it's almost changed your perspective on how you see houses nowadays?
Yeah, I do. And you touched on something that I still kind of struggle with every time. It's those dang eaves troughs, because there's so many lines. There's so many angles and lines. And I find I'm getting to the point where less is more now, where, it's another one of those things where people know it's an eaves trough. I don't need to go into great detail about it. But roof lines and eaves troughs and windows and doors are all things that are crucial for the structure of a drawing, but sometimes it's best not to draw too much attention to it.
Yeah, it's almost like the viewer will feel compelled to fill in the blanks themselves, right, as they look at it. Yeah,
that's right. And that's often why I darken the windows as well. It keeps people wondering what's the story, what's going on in there.
What did you think when you first saw Carolyn's work? What struck you about it most when you first laid eyes on it?
I thought the first thing I saw, I thought it was a painting. It was fantastic. And I have to tell you, I love going into the studio in part because I don't know if you've seen pictures of the studio, but she's got these cupboards that are just full of these juicy colored wools. And I get to work in an area that's surrounded by all these beautiful colors of wool. And she has her artwork posted throughout the studio. And it's like looking at these beautiful paintings. So our work is very different from each other's, but I think they complement each other quite well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought the moment I saw your site. And I think you probably felt the same, Sarah, when I shared it with you.
Oh yeah, it's night and day. You think, oh, how did you guys find each other? But we know, right? Just similar interests and, similar wants and wishes and dreams. But how wonderful that somebody might stumble in for Carolyn's work or Della's work and find the other one.
That's true.
Yeah.
Like they're so different, and yet they complement each other well. And we're going to have an exhibit as later on this summer at some point, COVID allowing. Mm-hmm. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this celebration of Canada that we're going to have in our exhibit, how our two different artwork is going to meld together to create this one celebration of Canada and its diversity.
I'm just trying to visualize, because now when you're talking about that, I'm imagining walking through your studio and seeing everyone's work. What size are you working at? What size are your sketches?
So my sketches are done on 9x12 sheets of paper. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be fairly consistent. I think Carolyn's artwork is going to vary just because working with wool is, she works with precision, but the sizing is going to vary from one piece to another. Mm-hmm. So we're hoping to meet together to kind of lay out how this is going to look in our studio.
And Della, you somehow managed to not overwork your drawings. Like you get them to a point and then you're like, yep, that's it. And it doesn't need one more line or anything.
Yeah. I don't work for hours and hours and hours on sketches, and I tend to not do rough drafts first. I just start laying down the lines and laying down the paint, and I work my way around the sketch. I have one sitting here. That's what I keep looking at. I'm working on one right now. It's the St. Jacobs location.
That's beautiful.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what that is.
You know what that is. Yeah.
It's so special that we get to see that at the stage that it's at right there. Like
half finished, but yeah.
It's even beautiful as it is.
Yeah.
You haven't seen it that closely. But yeah, there comes a point where I look at it and I say, yeah, it does not need a single more line. It's done.
So you're not moving into digital at all, right? You are just doing everything by hand. You're not working in any sort of iPad situation or Procreate or any of that.
So I don't import these into Procreate and do any kind of touching up on that. The only thing that I'm doing is I adjust cropping and things like that in Photoshop.
To post
I do some digital art. I do have Procreate. I've done some line drawings. That hasn't been my focus this year, but it is something that I would like to pursue. I've taken some courses on using Procreate. That's a whole other rabbit hole, though. That's a powerful, powerful tool.
It is. I often say it's like Adobe's Fresco. It's you actually get textures and weights. You can feel the pull of a line if you're using a different type of pen or pencil. But let's geek out on supplies here. So when you've talked to us at great length about great length about the paper and struggles getting the paper that you want to use and try out more. But what pens are you using typically? So I am almost exclusively using micron pens, the varying lengths of tips. Those are great. And then I do some shading with Tombow dual brush pens. Mm-hmm. They're great because you've got the thick brush end and you've got the finer tip at the end. So I can do some shading work with these. I use those in grayscale. And then I use an assortment of watercolors. Do you have any favorites for the watercolors?
I'm using Winsor and Newton. I picked up a set. We visited New York City a couple of years ago, and I found an art store there. And I picked up a box of watercolors there, and I'm slowly making my way through it. But I'm quite enjoying the assortment of colors that Winsor and Newton has. And
you're achieving that rich color. When I look at your work, it almost looks like Winsor Newton acrylics that just with just a bit of water, but those colors you're achieving with the watercolors must be quite sorry, I'm trying to think of the words, like dense with pigment that you're able to achieve that. Yeah,
they are. And sometimes through layering through different coats of it, then you can get that varying intensity at different on different parts of the sketch, right, where you want to kind of draw more attention to. So it's fun to play.
And you're able to achieve that kind of control, I guess. Do you have a paper towel nearby? You're ready to kind of dab it up if it goes too far?
Oh, yeah.
Ah, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have to add a lot of patience. There's some drying and some blending, right? Layering.
Well, there's a really freaky moment on every sketch where you kind of lay some initial lines down and then you start throwing the color in, and it's really chaotic. And it's a little scary because you think, how is this ever going to become something? And when you start adding the lines and create definition, then I start to calm down because, okay, I can see this taking shape now. But there is this moment of panic when the color first goes down.
And the last thing you're doing is using those black pens, that ink, to just go over the last of the lines so that any color that's there that bleeds between lines has a line on top of it, right? Yeah.
That's right.
For some definition.
Yeah. And that's what just makes things pop out, right? You can add the little details.
That area that you live in, how does West Montrose differ from Conestoga, which differs from St. Jacobs?
How are they different? Well, Conestoga has a number of buildings on Sawmill Road that have these false fronts on them. St. Jacobs has some as well, like the Wild West, like the saloon type fronts. West Montrose does not, but different types of people settled into West Montrose than in Conestoga and St. Jacobs. There were more Scotsmen who were out in West Montrose, more German in Conestoga and St. Jacobs. And so I think that is reflected somewhat in its architecture. West Montrose uses a lot of fieldstone in their buildings. The older buildings, there are a lot of fieldstone buildings in West Montrose. There were brickyards that were in Conestoga, so there's a lot more brick homes in Conestoga. Yeah, the little things that you notice when you start paying attention.
Yeah, so what's it like to put a book out there in the world?
Yeah, so you have a few.
Neither of us have done it, so.
No, not yet. Marshall's gonna.
Yeah.
So I don't have the patience to go through traditional publishing, so they're all self-published. I like to be in control.
Me too, I get you.
Yeah, I like to be in control of the content. I like to be in control of how it's marketed. And I like to control how the funds are spent. So I always create books with a mission. There's always a component to the sales of the book. A portion of the proceeds go to a place where I want it to go. So it supports things in the community. So my book on Conestoga, a portion of that went towards Ray of Hope. My book on West Montrose, a portion of the proceeds of that goes to the Guelph to Goderich Trail, the Kissing Bridge Trailway, to help with the maintenance of the trail. The 12 Feasts of Christmas, a portion of the proceeds from the sale of that book goes to the food bank. Books not only need to tell stories, but they need to connect people together. And I feel very strongly about that. And by publishing it myself, I can control that.
And when you do drawings, are you connecting with the people who have an association with those places? I guess I'm thinking of how that old 100-plus-year-old church in St. Jacobs, which is owned by Toy Soup. Like, have Rob and Lisa Boulian seen that drawing you've done?
On Instagram, they have. Okay. I haven't gone in there and said, here's a drawing of your building. I just post it up on social media and then I tag them and then they see it up there. It's difficult right now to connect with people before the fact. It's difficult for me to walk up to somebody's door and say, tell me about your house.
I'd like to draw your house. I'm not creepy, I swear.
Yeah, I know.
There's a really nice mural on the front of Toy Soup that I think was painted maybe a year and a half ago now. And I just saw a Stephanie Boutari mural right around there. And also,
on Front Street.
Have you seen Bill Manson's little carvings of wooden heads? He hides them along the Mill Race Trail. Have you seen those?
No.
Oh, he's
it looks like you want to see them right now.
Yeah,
well, I've walked. How long have they been there?
Well, he hides them, right? So I've got about 8 of them we've found on the Mill Race Trail. He hides them like on trees and little posts. They're just small little heads, wooden heads. And Bill goes, I like to hide the wee heads. I like to think about people finding the wee heads. And he carves these beautiful little heads. Some of them are like Vikings. Some of them are all sorts of different kind of characters. And but you have to look for them. You have to really look for it. And when we go out, that's all we're doing is we're looking for the wee heads.
You're looking for. So when I go on the Mill Race Trail, that's when I take my camera and I'm photographing the birds and feeding the chickadees and, shooting pictures of them as they're landing on my hand and eating bird seed. So that's
now you
what
have
I
to
do.
look for heads.
Yes, absolutely.
So if I understood Carolyn right, Blue Sky Art Studio was never intended to be a studio that was open all the time and people would come to St. Jacobs and just walk in the door and be in your space. It would be, I think she said, like kind of an appointment only, and there'd be classes. And was that your vision too when you first imagined a studio?
Yeah. So I was just looking for a space where I could get away from home and just really focus on making art. And we had talked about that being the focus of the studio. And, thinking about, we could have some opening hours, but we're not on King Street. We're on Cedar Street. So the bulk of the traffic on a Tuesday, Thursday, or Saturday, they're going up and down King Street. We're around the corner. People tend to not venture too much around the corner, and that's okay with us. We've had some people knock on the door and we've let them in. So we're not totally against being open, but we both have families at home too. And it would be difficult for us to commit that every day we're going to be in the studio working and having, browsers come in. So yeah, I agree with that, we'll go by appointment. There will be times when we will be open. We tried to be open during St. Jacob's Sparkles, which was going to be open for 6 weeks. And then it got shut down after week 1 or 2. So
fingers crossed for this year.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And have you worked with any of Carolyn's materials, like with the wools and wet wool and felting materials? And
maybe you can't say. Do you do it when she's not there?
Yes, don't say anything. No, I'm actually a little intimidated by it. I can't understand how she can take these loose fibers and create these beautiful pictures.
She's so humble about it. She's just like, I just kind of wiggle things around and it happens. I'm like, I don't think so. I think that you are putting some serious thought into it.
And it's not false modesty. She honestly.
She's so.
I know.
I just see what works.
It just happens. Yeah.
I wonder if her husband Tim is the same way. I just throw some and
then it comes out.
Yeah, and the Pope takes it.
That's right. Easy peasy.
Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah, I know. Well, the times when we were allowed to be in the studio together, she would sometimes be working on her wet felting and I'd be kind of working at my desk and kind of, copping a few glances to see how she does stuff. I would like to take a workshop with her at some point once that's able to happen. But yeah, certainly that would be the way to learn. I think she'd be a great teacher because she is so laid back and let it be.
So when you were on that tour in New Orleans, was that instructor who was taking you around, was he basically just leaving it up to you to interpret everything around you, the landscape around you as you did, or was he giving you ideas along the way? And were there things that stuck with you? Kind of like, I know, like when you have a driver instructor, it's kind of like that person's head is their voice is in your head for a long time afterwards, right?
Yeah, and I would say that, the people who go on these trips with a specific instructor want to pick that instructor's brain and learn their methods, right? So he's very much telling us, walking us through his process, how he structures things, the steps that he takes in order to create this final sketch. And those are things that do ring through my mind still as I'm working on things. And that was very much what I wanted to get out of that trip was, how does he do that? And how can I do that and make it my own? Because I don't do it the same way he does. Mine look nothing like his, but there are elements that you can tell where there is his influence in what I do.
So that piece that you're working on now, for listeners, I'll describe it as in the village of St. Jacobs. It's more towards it's on the north end, across from the old mill, right? And also then across the street would be Block 3 Brewing. And anybody who spends time in the village knows this used to be a candy shop, an ice cream shop, and fudge shop for a really long time. And then it was a Scottish shop. Yeah.
And prior to that, the attic had a billiards room for men.
Interesting.
Didn't know that.
Yes.
So what an interesting place to sketch, meaning millions of people have had their photos taken right there, and a billion family memories have happened there. Are you thinking about the kind of history of these places when you're sitting down and drawing them, or do you see them kind of more in the present as they are now?
Well, that's an interesting question because I tend to choose old buildings. And so I do wonder about the stories, but I'm also looking at it in this modern context. So an old building still has, original windows or original paint on it. And yet there's still something modern. So it's my sketches, I try to combine past and present together. And I think that is what can also add to interest as well, where these buildings are storied, but there's still future stories to tell.
When you live in Waterloo and then move out to the country, what's that like?
I love living here. This is such a great place to live. There's space here. It's quiet. I love the peacefulness of living in Conestoga. I do crave sometimes the hustle and bustle and having things more at my fingertips. But now that we have the Crow's Foot in town, we do have some more conveniences nearby.
Right, because they have a store inside.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been great having that and just run out and pick up something real quick. It was always a half-hour turnaround to pick up a bag of milk.
And I guess the Crow's Foot Smokehouse has its own history as well, right? With that,
it does. Yeah.
What's the history, you guys?
I just remember reading on the website kind of the story of how that building's been there for a really, really long time.
Oh, yeah, right.
Probably was surrounded by nothing for a very long time too. Yeah.
It used to be a resort. Conestoga was a resort town way back when. Yeah. People would come in from the big city of Toronto and they would stay at the inn that was there, the resort that was there. And, change of hands, a couple burning downs and, rebuilding. And now we have the Crow's Foot. So,
Della, as we start to wrap up, I can't believe this work started only like a year or so ago.
Yeah.
That's amazing that you got to a place so quickly, that you have this style that is distinctly yours and so genuinely Canadian too. Yeah, thanks.
It's what else was I able to do over this past year? But to sit at home and to hone these skills and to tell stories and again, put this out there in the public eye so that it connects people together and it creates more stories. It's been a great experience. It's been a wonderful way to connect to people And, connecting with Carolyn was an added bonus to all of this. I would have never dreamed a year ago I'd be working out of a studio either. But this pandemic has had some bright spots. We've all had to try to find those.
Hey all, thanks for meeting us in Bonn Park. Please like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on the platform that you're listening to. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Bonn Park Podcast. Original music by Alan Lung.